Good morning and welcome to Storytelling for Change, a virtual showcase. My name is Kim Hunt and I'm the Executive Director of Pride Action Tank, a multi-issue project incubator and think tank focused on action that improves outcomes and opportunities for LGBTQ plus people and other marginalized groups. We're a project of AIDS Foundation Chicago, where I also serve as the Senior Director of Policy and Advocacy Operations. And I am thrilled to be with you today to open today's program. Storytelling for Change is one of the outcomes of Outaging Summit on Our Possibilities, which Pride Action Tank and the Outaging Committee organized in 2017. Among the comments that we heard from LGBT older adults at that summit were that they had a desire for more LGBT cultural competency and humility among service providers, including long-term care facilities, as well as the desire to continue to be engaged in advocacy efforts for themselves, the people they care about, and the communities that they live in. The Outaging Committee consists of representatives of several LGBT older adult focused programs, as well as researchers throughout the city, as well as LGBT older adults, and was instrumental in both planning the summit in 2017 and the activities that followed. Now, last year, we developed a program to enhance the skills of a cohort of LGBT older adults to have conversations with policymakers and other decision makers about the presence and the needs of LGBT older adults in long-term care facilities, and to provide Illinois-specific resources to help those facilities and others on their journey to cultural humility. But like everyone, we had to change our plans due to the global pandemic we are still experiencing. So we pivoted. We wanted to take the time to lift up the stories of LGBT older adults while addressing the social isolation that the pandemic has just made worse for all of us. And we also wanted to continue to build and enhance the advocacy skills of LGBT older adults. I'll come back and talk about the latter training at the end of the program. But for now, I'm going to turn things over to my buddy, Archie Jim John. We work together on the Outspoken short storytelling show that in normal times takes place at Sidetrack on the first Tuesday of the month. We can still all catch that show virtually, still first Tuesday of the month. And we also have a podcast called On the Mic. And Archie is just a phenomenal storyteller himself. A Moth Grand Slam winner. He teaches storytelling. He tells stories all over the city. And to get a story from him, which you won't get today, is a real treat. But I encourage you to follow Archie through social media and on his website. So I'm going to turn it over now to Archie so we can get on with the show.
All right. Good morning, everyone. It's such an honor to be here. I was so honored when Kim asked me to help out with this project. It has been such a life-saving. Tuesday morning's been my favorite for the last few months. And if you want to catch Outspoken, we'll actually not be next Tuesday, November 3rd, the scariest day that we are looking forward to. We will be November 10th, and I will be telling Outspoken, so you can catch Outspoken on Facebook. But today is all about these storytellers, and I'm so proud of the work they've done. They've been incredible. We're going to start things out with Phyllis Johnson. And here's a little bio for Phyllis. Phyllis Johnson is a rookie storyteller. She is owned by her two four-legged sons who are happy she is retired. They claim her total focus. Please welcome Phyllis Johnson. I think you're on mute, Phyllis. Welcome to the world of Zoom. Okay, here we go.
Okay, so good morning, everybody. I'm really thrilled to be able to tell you this story, much to my surprise. Starting in my mid-30s, I worked in higher education. One day, a colleague excitedly showed me an article about a card company, a greeting card company, that was about to bring out a line of cards aimed specifically at the gay and lesbian consumer. Thought it was a good idea, but I couldn't figure out why she was showing this to me. A couple of years later, in my 40s, I came out to myself. I was apparently out to my colleagues already. In fact, just recently, I realized that I served on the thesis committees of most of the lesbian and gay students in my department. So apparently I was out to my students as well. I maintain a warm relationship with my former colleagues and students. My longtime partner and I had a great retirement plan. After we quit our jobs, we would sell our respective residences and move to a less extreme climate. Then a friend suggested that maybe we might want to try living together first, a test. As luck would have it, I had just signed a contract for a single family house on the south side of Chicago, closer to her. Right after I closed on the house in October of 2008, she started living there, mostly. A month later, she moved in. We passed. We lived in the most socially conservative Black neighborhood in the city of Chicago. I became active in the West Chesterfield Community Association. We had wonderful neighbors. They politely but persistently tried to figure out our relationship. In my early 60s, I became a co-peer lead for Affinity's new 60+ group, the Trailblazers. Affinity Community Services is a Southside-based community organization that advocates for and builds community among African American LGBTQ people. In 2013, we planned a luncheon featuring a speaker discussing Medicare and the various types of supplements. We promoted this event all over the South Side in lesbian and senior spaces. We had a great turnout, including some strangers. Unfortunately, the luncheon coincided with my personal holiday, my birthday. How could I celebrate? I thought long and hard. That year, the Marriage Equality Act had passed, effective the following year. I decided to propose to my Robbie. I bought a new outfit, a ring, and wrangled the assignment to be the last speaker closing out the luncheon. At the end of the luncheon, I was talking about all the gifts that my association with Affinity had brought me, especially the Trailblazers. I realized some of the guests were not happy to be at a lesbian and gay event. I plunged forward. I began walking towards my intended. One of the strangers, a lady in a pink hat, was vigorously shaking her head. I got down on one knee and proposed. After the proposal, which was accepted, by the way, the pink hat lady was nowhere to be found. 11 months later, we were married. Unfortunately, Robbie was sick at the time of our ceremony. Devastatingly, she died 4 months later. At her memorial, I was surprised that 2 groups of neighbors came, our ever inquiring across the street neighbors and a group from the community association. We were good neighbors, still are. In 2017, I was pleased to sit on a panel at the Pride Tank AARP Out Aging Summit. This panel focused on community and connections. I was joined on the panel by a manager of a senior center on the South Side. She told us how glad she was that she and her staff had undergone diversity training and how it improved the climate at the center. She also told us a story about one of her favorite participants. He had left her a note that he was leaving the center. He explained in his note that he loved the activities, loved the staff, but did not feel welcome by the other participants. I am warmly embraced and valued at Affinity activities and in my neighborhood and among my former students and colleagues, actually, still. As a widow, I want to expand my contacts. I wonder, though, what my reception would be in a group of older Black folks like the lady with the pink hat who do not know me as a good neighbor, a good friend, a good colleague.
Thank you so much, Phyllis. So just a little follow-up question, Phyllis. If you could give the lady in the pink hat a greeting card, what would that greeting card say?
The greeting card would probably say, I'm good people too, just like you. And I'm kind of funny.
And can you talk a little bit more about the diversity training you think participants might need?
I just think that, like sometimes people sit in their own little spots. I mean, now we're used to having our own bubbles. And those are people that are similar to us by and large, in one way or another. And we don't necessarily get to know other folks, outside of our religion, outside of our neighborhood, outside of our social clubs. And I think it makes people wary. And if people could let down their guard a little and be more accustomed to people of different stripes, it would be great.
I think there should be a line of greeting cards dedicated to that cause. And I think you might be the one to start it, Phyllis.
Oh, no. Retired, cat,
Okay.
dog.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Our next teller is Tim J. Holt. Tim Holt lives in Chicago with his partner, Dan, and his dog, Rummy. He is a retired physician and writer and has written for numerous medical journals. Now that he is retired, he writes poetry, plays, and novels. His inspiration comes from life's events. He especially likes to explore the relationship of healing, literature, and spirituality. His work has appeared in numerous magazines, and he has produced 2 plays. He has published a novel, Square Affair. He also works to help churches become more inclusive of LGBT+ individuals. Please welcome Timothy Holt.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. Inasmuch as Tim is a practicing homosexual, which we find filthy, dirty, and disgusting. These are the opening words from my wife's divorce attorney. With my sexual life on display, I do feel dirty and immoral. I imagine a choir singing Abomination like Handel's Hallelujah chorus. I want to hide, maybe back into the closet. Luck or God was with me. The judge stares at my wife and her attorney. If this is how you plan to behave yourself in my courtroom, you will get little in this settlement. A welcome statement for 1980. The judge assigned us a court-appointed negotiator. As my attorney and I wait for the negotiator, my palms are sweaty, my throat dry, my heart pounding so loud I can't hear much else. Judgmental eyes must be staring at me from other rooms in the hallway. I watch dust motes floating in the light rays to keep my mind off the upcoming interrogation of my sex life and the emptying of my bank account. I'm expecting a demure, prudish, straight-laced, Bible-thumping churchwoman to pass judgment on me. But when the negotiator walks into the room, she's a young woman in a short, black leather skirt, black leather blouse, and black leather jacket. She's sizzling hot, even to this gay man. Her spiked black leather high heels click as she approaches the conference table. I imagine the rich, earthy, slightly sweet smell of leather on a hunky, muscled man. However, he'll do me little good today. This negotiator should have no preconceived opinions about me. I whisper, "Thank you, God. I didn't think you were listening." The discussion begins with child support. Child support is fine. I won't abandon my kids, but my wife wants all support to be 20% of my income for life. That's till death do us part. The negotiator responds, "You have a career as a practicing attorney. There's no need for Tim to pay spousal support." Now, visitation with the children. My wife and her attorney channel Anita Bryant and her Save the Children campaign. They believe gay men are not fit to be alone with children for fear of polluting their immortal souls. The children should be chaperoned when with me. With a smirk, the negotiator says, "You know, even with supervision, Tim could leave for a few minutes, have a quick blowjob, and return." My wife and her attorney pulled back their heads like trying to avoid a strike from a venomous snake. The negotiator was not finished. "Tim will agree to your demand if you agree to the same arrangement when the kids are with you." My attorney sat back in her seat with a broad grin. Over the week, as we make our way through the final details of our divorce, my wife and I begin to talk to each other without attorneys or negotiator. My wife says she's regretting her decision, and she's amiable to let me move back in as a married gay man. While it's an attractive option, the initial shock of being outed is over, and I have no intention of going back into that closet. I also think it is unfair to my wife. She should have the opportunity to find someone who loves her fully. We agree the divorce is between us. We do not put our kids in the middle. When my kids could understand, I told them I'm gay. Their answer, "So what?" My partner and I are included in all family gatherings. My wife remarried and we've become friends. I helped her out when her husband's alcoholism was set to destroy her marriage and was there to support her when he died of lung cancer. During the wait time for our divorce to be final, I gave in to the advances of a hospital nurse. Sex in the back seat of her car was something I heard and dreamed about in high school, but never experienced. The backseat adventure does not go well. I couldn't get my legs and arms to bend as needed for a backseat rendezvous. Next week, we tried the deed in bed. Sex was better than I expected, but I'm firm in being a gay man. But gay does not fully define me. I'm a creation in God's image. I'm a friend of my ex-wife, and I'm a father.
Oh my God. Thank you, Tim. Such an awesome story. If you enjoyed Tim's story today, you can actually also catch him at the next Outspoken where he'll have a different story. So again, just inviting you to that. Tim, a question for you.
Sure.
The negotiator turns out to be such an ally in the story, so unexpected. If you could say anything to her today, what would it be?
I would tell her thank you, that because of her interventions, I was in a lot of ways able to move on without feeling the words that my wife's divorce attorney had said. And it leads me also to think of the message I'd like to send. And the message is, when you look at a gay man or a woman, they're more than what you think they are. They're more than what the word describes. And I just would like them to know that when they see others, especially elder gay people, there's often more to their background.
Oh my God, such an important message. Thank you so much, Tim. Our next speaker today is William Wilson. Will Wilson is an acquired taste, and he is excited to join us in this virtual showcase of storytelling. Will's stories often address issues of inequality and disparity around healthcare. He's told these stories to politicians at all levels of government and continues to to do so even now. He also likes to just chat with everyone he meets, as you'll soon find out. Please welcome William Wilson.
Good morning, everyone. Actually, I prefer Will. Usually when I'm being called William, it's because I'm in trouble for something, which is also not at all unusual. My story this morning is about my voice. Mom always told me I have a voice that could cut through glass. As far back as I can remember, folks have been commenting about how I sound. As a schoolboy, my voice earned me the privilege of often being called on to read out loud to the class, as well as an A+ for orating Lincoln's Gettysburg Address when I was about 10 or 11 years old. At that point in my life, it was never about how I sounded. Rather, it was about my ability to speak clearly and concisely. That changed when I got to junior high. Puberty was not kind to me. I was often teased for sounding like a sissy or a fag. I was definitely a target for the bullies who took every opportunity to harass me. Of course, none of this made me back down. In fact, it helped me to hone my ability to be sharp-tongued and become even more vocal than I'd ever been before. As an adult, I grew comfortable with the sound of my voice. I sang, I proclaimed the readings at Sunday masses, and I delivered speeches to local, state, and federal politicians. I've given guided tours of Chicago from the driver's seat of a trolley or the top of a double-decker bus. I've read stories to small children and sung lullabies to babies. A little more than 2 years ago, what started off as an earache and a sore throat turned out to be throat cancer, a tumor on my larynx, right at the juncture where the two halves meet. I was lucky, I was diagnosed early. Still, there were 2 surgeries I'd have to undergo to remove the tumor, and I had no idea what was going to be on the other side. What if I lost my voice permanently and I could never speak again? What if I had to use one of those contraptions that people hold against their throats in order to be heard? What if? There were a million questions. After surgery, I wasn't supposed to speak at all. Now, anyone who knows me knows that that is a nearly impossible task. And I'll admit I failed miserably within the first 24 hours. I wanted to see how I sounded, so I tried to speak. And of course, then I started chastising myself out loud, taking myself to task for impeding the healing process because I'm just impatient. Using the phone was out of the question. I had no volume. And because I was still learning how to breathe with my altered vocal cords. I also quickly learned that automated answering systems, they didn't recognize the sound that I made as being viably human. I once found myself in tears in the lobby of the hospital after one of my doctor visits when I'd spent nearly 10 minutes trying to get through one of those horror shows. I actually had to ask a stranger to speak for me. Sometimes life teaches us to be humble when we're least willing to learn. This lovely rasp that I now call my very own is a work in progress. When I first started speaking in public again, it didn't always go well. There were folks who thought I wasn't speaking loudly or quickly enough, and they let me know that in no uncertain terms. I did my best to help them understand it was out of my control. Still, it hurt. I went through phases. First, the Darth Vader phase, quickly followed by Christian Bale's version of Batman. And all of this was salved one day when I was at the play lot with my friend's daughters, Tamsin, who was 5 at the time, and her younger sister, Finn, age 3. They were digging in the sandbox. I was watching them. They'd ask me questions. I'd answer. There was a little boy who was maybe about 20 months old who'd focus on me like a laser beam every time he heard my voice. I started watching him to see what he was going to do. I had no idea what to expect. All of a sudden, he looked me straight in the eye, grinned the biggest grin that he could muster, and then started imitating my sound. If I'd been looking for a hug from the universe, that was it. When I went back to work at the counter at Starbucks on Michigan Avenue, I was supposed to wear one of those personalized speakers so that I didn't stress my vocal cords and that customers could hear me. I hated that thing for 2 reasons. First of all, it elicited sympathy, which I wasn't comfortable with. And secondly, wearing it was simply a pain in the ass. That whole process lasted for about a week. I would keep it nearby in case I needed it, but that never happened. My regulars were happy to see me again. It had been about 10 months that I'd been there, so we had some catching up to do. And no one was complaining about my sound, though they did comment that it was different. I transferred from the store on Michigan Avenue to one closer to where I live. At the new store, they put me to work in the window. In fact, I became known as Will in the Window. I was the guy who took your money and handed you your order. Now, one of the focuses of Starbucks is what they call customer connection. All partners, Starbucks employees, are encouraged to make a connection with the customer at every step of the process. Perfect for somebody like me, and I took full advantage of every opportunity. It was always my habit to end every interaction with an alliteration based on the day of the week. So for today is Wednesday. So I'd say, have a welcoming Wednesday, have a warm Wednesday, have a wet Wednesday, whatever was going on outside. My friends, my regulars looked forward to my creation so much that often they try to guess what I was about to say. I, of course, eagerly anticipated their reactions. Now, not everybody enjoyed my little spiel. I had one regular who gave me such an icy glare every time that she realized she had to deal with me. I started to laugh when she would come through. I also realized I was very good at this whole customer connection routine. And most importantly, I noticed that folks liked the sound of my voice because they told me so. Every time I received a compliment, of course, I'd thank the giver, but I'd muse internally over my past fears of not being heard. One of my best days was when I received a handmade card from the 4 children of one of my regulars. They all drew on it and they all signed their names. Now, my voice has changed. There are things now that I cannot do, such as sing a falsetto or sing a range of scales. Still, I can and I do speak out to politicians and to those in power about the issues that are important to me and to my community. With each passing day, my sound does improve. I notice it when I do something vocally I haven't done in a while. In fact, I recently discovered I can once again shriek. Doesn't always happen, and when it does, it sounds a little odd. I think my muscle memory is still looking for tissue that isn't there. And while I don't sing in public, I will try when I'm alone. Once again, I'm lecturing at Mass and I'm receiving compliments. My soul soars, though, the most when I'm with Auden, who is my heart and almost 2 years old. He'll ask me to read The Crack in the Track or Harold in the Purple Crayon or the ABC book over and over and over and over again. Makes me smile. Thanks for listening.
Oh my God. Well, I have to say that I love the sound of your voice. I find it very appealing. I have to say that. And I was also wondering, do you have an alliteration for today?
Yeah, you actually heard it. It's a welcoming Wednesday because, you know, it is Wednesday. It's not Tuesday. I know you're thinking we're in our regular class, Archie.
I did. I was like, oh my God, it's Tuesday. It's very early.
One of the benefits of getting older, Archie, is that we become little bits of mind readers. So I kind of knew where you were going because that's where I would have gone if I were you. So yeah.
My question for you is, you know, Auden is such a sweet, wonderful presence in this story. And I wonder if he could hear the story in 20 years, what would you like him to take away from it?
Well, I would want him to realize how important his listening without judgment is. I think that one of the things that I went through was feeling that judgment that I thought I had gotten past. When I was younger, I was teased for sounding like a sissy and a fag. And I grew up to be an adult who was not at all ashamed about the way that I sounded. And then once again, I found myself in a situation where people didn't like the way that I sounded, or so I thought. And it was circular. I went back to that. So he provided a base that allowed me to to get the acknowledgement from other people. Because again, I mean, yeah, it was very important to me how he reacted to the sound, how he reacts to what I do. And the fact that he will sit there and have me read the same thing over and over and over ad nauseum tells me that he likes having me around and he doesn't mind the sound. So that's a good thing.
Well, thank you for your story. And also
My
thank
pleasure.
you. I don't know if everyone knows, but Will did some speaking with the senator yesterday about our healthcare rights. So he is really, really continuing to speak up for us. And it's been wonderful to get to know you over these weeks. Well, thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Our next speaker today is Danny Morello. Danny is a trans woman and a steadfast advocate for trans inclusion and affirmation. She serves as a community member of the Howard Brown Aging Services Advisory Board, is active on the Center on Addison Speaker Program, and is a member of the SAIC Intergenerational Dialogue Project. She is a parent of 4 adult children and has 4 granddaughters. She lives in Andersonville. Please welcome Danny Morello.
Thank you, Archie. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. We really appreciate it. About 2 years ago, I began to notice some pain in my lower abdomen. This was followed by a slowly emerging bulge. After being examined by my doctor, I was told I had a hernia, 2 hernias in fact, and that I should arrange for surgery. She gave me a referral to a hospital here in Chicago. I made the appointment to see a surgeon. I wasn't concerned about any risks of the surgery or the outcome. My surgeon was highly skilled, the hospital was top-notch, and I was in reasonably good health for my age. My only concern really was that my gender identity would not be affirmed. You see, I am a transgender woman. To be transgender means that one's deeply felt sense of their gender does not conform with the gender they were assigned at birth. In my case, based on certain observed physical characteristics, I was assigned male at birth, and yet I am female through and through. My gender identity is precious to me. I feel it as a beautiful jewel deep in my heart. Even though I had been intentional in sharing my gender identity with my surgeon and their staff, I wasn't going to leave it to chance that this would be passed on to others at the hospital. I was going to have to advocate for myself. So my therapist and I came up with a plan. It was a simple plan, really, involving what could be called accessories. My therapist gave me a few message pins with statements such as trans bodies are beautiful and celebrate trans lives and a few others. I also had a stick-on name tag, but I had no idea how the hospital staff would react. On the day of my surgery, my daughter, who would act as both driver and support person, saw to it that we left home for the hospital on time to arrive at the ungodly hour of 5:30 a.m. I was wearing comfortable feminine clothing. I'd washed my hair, styled it a bit, and I applied just a touch of blush on my cheekbones. As my daughter and I entered the hospital, the first thing we noticed was how oddly quiet it was. And with the exception of the security person at the door, we didn't see anyone as we made our way to the reception area of the surgery center. After checking in at the desk, I was given a form on a clipboard to fill out. After filling out the form and returning it, and as I was making my way back to my chair, I hear the receptionist say, excuse me, sir, you need to sign the form. This is an example of what is called misgendering. Simply put, misgendering is referring to someone by the pronouns or honorifics of a gender that is not theirs. This happens to trans people on a daily basis. When it occurs, it's not too much to say that we feel devastated and erased. I went back to the desk, signed the form, and returned to sit with my daughter. It took me some minutes to recover. I chose not to correct this person, but I was resolved to ensure that I did not get misgendered for the remainder of my stay at the hospital. It wasn't long before the door of the surgery center opened and I heard my name called. I left my bag of belongings with my daughter and followed the staff member. I was led to a curtained private space, which had a bed and a chair. I was asked to remove my clothes and put on the gown that was already placed on the bed. I did what I was asked to do and sat down. Almost immediately, I noticed voices. And within the course of maybe 10 or so minutes, more hospital staff began showing up. As they did, my anxiety level increased. A member of the nursing staff came to where I was to make sure I had put on my gown and then went to get my daughter. When my daughter came in, I asked her for my pins, with which I proceeded to decorate the front of my gown. I took out my name tag and with a marker, I wrote, "My pronouns are she, her, hers." I imagined I looked like I was going to a political campaign or possibly a baseball game. This was sure to get the attention of the staff. Soon a different nurse came in. They stopped and looked at me with obvious surprise and confusion. They were especially focused on my name tag and asked, "What is that?" I explained that I was a trans woman and that these were my pronouns. They responded, "Oh, okay," and smiled. I was cautiously hopeful. It wasn't long before others arrived to check my blood pressure, my temperature, my pulse, to read and explain various forms to sign. There must have been a dozen or more people involved in my care. Strangely, with the exception of the first nurse, no one commented on my pins or pronouns. I wondered, were they ignoring them? Possibly objecting? Thought I was being ridiculous. I laid back, closed my eyes, thinking about all of this. Then I heard a friendly voice. "Good morning, Mrs. Morello. I'm Mark, and I will be your anesthesiologist today." So obviously word of my gender identity had spread. And although the title was relationally incorrect, it was delightfully gender affirming. At that moment, my anxiety disappeared and I became fully relaxed. The remaining several hours are a blur to me. It wasn't until the next day, after mostly recovering from the anesthesia, that I could think clearly. And I believed then, as I do now, that my gender identity was affirmed. In fact, my daughter told me that in her conversations with the staff, they nearly always used my proper pronouns. And I'm convinced that this was due to my self-advocacy, which led to this positive outcome for me. But I wonder, did this influence any changes at the hospital? Would there be space for conversation about policy? I'll never know. But I can't help but think that a tiny seed was planted, and time will tell if it takes root and flourishes. Thank you.
Oh my God, such an inspirational story. Thank you, Danny.
Welcome.
I find I'm so inspired by this story because you're such a great advocate for yourself in it. I find that so powerful. And I was just wondering, were you always that way, or how did you learn to be that way? If you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. And in a way, it was kind of natural for me because when I first came out and started living as best I could in my gender identity, I have to tell you that I felt wonderful about it. I was so joyful. As I mentioned, it's a precious jewel inside me. And I wanted to share this with people. Of course, I didn't get a good reception all of the time, but nonetheless, people could see how genuinely joyful I was. And that had the effect, I think, of disarming them a bit. I can be very welcoming, and people feel really comfortable with me. And so I advocate for myself for that reason. And also, I learned that there are some spaces that can be unsafe. And so but there are things that I can do through self-advocacy that can make it easier for me. So it took time, it takes a lot of thought, and it also takes a lot of energy, really. I would rather, not feel the exhaustion afterwards, as all of us do. It becomes tiring, but self-advocacy, we all have to do that, we all do. Everyone knows what that's like.
Well, I just wrote down the power of your own joy, because I think
Yes,
I am
But-
going to have to use that power a lot in the next week, as we all are. So I
That's
really
right.
love that phrase. I had to write that down. That's great.
that's good
Thank you so
phrase.
much, Danny.
Thanks, Archie.
Well, as Kim would say, we've come to that bittersweet moment when it's our last storyteller for today. But don't worry, we have a discussion afterwards, so it doesn't quite end. But our final teller is Donald Bell. Donald Bell, he, him, his, identifies as a 71-year-old single, cisgender, pro-feminist, gay, or SGL, man of African, Indigenous, and Scottish-Irish roots. Don is a third-generation native-born Chicagoan, Southsider, and lifelong White Sox fan. He is a retired professional in higher education administration, student affairs, certified in HIV/AIDS counseling, health education and outreach, and an IDC FS social worker. Now, at the end of a long hiatus, he plans to re-enter the work field in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion. He has become a recognized resource in the area of aging in general, and LGBT plus aging in particular. He often presents on those and related intersectional social justice issues. Please welcome Donald Bell.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Arch. Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. And so let's get started. All right. Let's talk about homos. Homo sapiens, that is. Human beings. There are 7 billion plus of us distributed along the globe. And we engage in very typical human behaviors. One of the things that we do to deal with big numbers is we break things down, we group them, we catalog, categorize, and create hierarchies amongst them. We have broken our globe down into 150 approximately nation states. And from those nation states, we engage in other typical human behaviors. We create competition. We tend to shy away from cooperation. We tend to be much more efficient at waging war than waging peace. But all of those are quote unquote normal human behaviors. And so we break ourselves down further and further. And when we get to the community level, like here in the United States, our communities are defined as those areas of our geopolitical action space where we were born, where we grow up, and that influence our socialization. And within those communities of origin are, of course, our families of origins who are part of it. So it's the people to whom we were born, the family expectations that we have, and the feedback that we get on how we are doing as human beings. And one thing about those communities is that they too are broken down in terms of social hierarchy, in terms of privilege and social marginalization. And we have, for instance, 4 or 5 different characteristics that we can talk about in terms of those communities. For instance, if one is in a community that's marginalized on the basis of race or class, then roughly just about 100% of the people who are part of that community are just like each of us as individuals. If we're marginalized in a community based on gender, well, at least half or close to half of the people in that community are just like us. But when we're marginalized in the area of sexual orientation and gender identity, oftentimes we are alone in our families of origin and in our communities of origin. And we sometimes experience exclusion from those communities, rejections by those communities, and that has a lasting effect. And for those of us who are in the older generation, this is a lifetime effect that we've dealt with. And yet it continues to happen. For as much progress as we've made in the civil rights of the LGBT community, there still exists this experience that youngsters coming out today experience. And that's why we have such things as an overrepresentation of LGBT youngsters in our homeless populations throughout our country and our cities in particular. But I was lucky when it was my turn because I had an exceptional experience. I was born to parents who were not only accepting, but who were very firm about unconditional love and their advocacy and support of me. And I'd like to speak about my mom, because yes, I'm one of those mama's boys. And the wonderful thing about my mom, whom I lost 7 years ago, was that she was a confirming supporter in my life. We had conversations that went on the entire life. And the particular part of her life that I'd like to share with you is the last 18 years when I was her sole caregiver. Now, Mom and I have been partnered in some very important things in my life. For instance, she and I together took care of my dad at home for the last 12 and a half years of his life. And she was also my partner in raising my 2 sons. So we had continued our conversations after my dad passed away and after my sons grew up. And one of the important things that I wanted to talk to her about, particularly toward the end of her life, was to make sure that we had had all the conversations. I didn't want to have the experience of regretting because there were things that we hadn't said to each other. And one of the things I asked was something that I already knew the answer to, but I did not want to presume that my response was her response. So I said to her, Mom, I says, now I know that you are a woman of faith. That's very important to you. I says, but, and you have always been my number one advocate. But let me ask you, does my sexual orientation compromise your values of faith or your religious practice? And my mother looked at me, she lifted her finger and she said, most emphatically, you are my son. And she was done with it. And I knew exactly what she meant because it was the behavior that she had always modeled. My parents, my mom in particular, exercised and lived the value of the divine stewardship of parenthood. She says, we do not own our children, but they are gifts from God. And our responsibility is to love them unconditionally and to provide the maximum amount of support that we can in their development. And she did. And on the day that she died, June 13th, 2013, 7:08 a.m. Sunday morning, I sat with her body and I thought, for the first time in my life, my mother is a place where I can't reach her and I can't continue our conversations. But her messages stayed with me and are with me always. Thank you.
Oh my God. I was so into that story, I almost forgot to unmute myself, Don. I have to say that throughout our session, you started talking about human behavior in the beginning of your story.
Yes.
I have to say throughout our sessions, you've dealt with some like difficult times, but you've always come to the sessions with this burst of energy and this light. And I just want to say I've admired that throughout the 5 weeks.
Well, thank you.
I am also a big mama's boy. There's no one happier that I'm gay than my mother. There's nothing in my life. But I was wondering if there are any other messages that you learned from your mother that you want to share with us in this little minute that we have.
Yes, my mother taught me that that divine stewardship of parenthood that she and my dad modeled was also a part of how we were to react to all human beings. You know, we come from a faith tradition that invokes our belief and love of God, but it also says that we are to love our sibling beings as we love ourselves. And so it was very important that we move beyond hate and challenge ourselves to get to a point of love. And we were connected to and there to support all human beings.
Oh, that is a beautiful statement to end this portion of this show. I love that message. Those are our stories for today, but right now I'm going to hand it over to Nick, who's been my partner in crime in leading this workshop. And Nick hails from the Great White North, also known as Canada, land of Celine Dion. Nick Westray is a newish professor at UIC. He's new to the Chicago area. He teaches courses on adult development and aging, and conducts research on life stories and intergenerational storytelling in the LGBTQ community. And while he enjoys his day job very much, he is holding out hope that his childhood dream of becoming a wizard will one day come true. So I don't know if there's anyone here that can help give him wizard lessons, but he will be open to that. Please welcome Nick.
Thank you so much, Archie. So yeah, great. Are we unmuted? I'd ask all the storytellers to unmute. Maybe we can flip into gallery view so we can have a discussion together that actually is going to look a lot like our Tuesday mornings, just casually chatting about these really important issues. I want to start by
need you for us to remember that it's Wednesday and not Tuesday, especially Archie. It's Wednesday, not Tuesday, boys.
Oh, I'm still grieving the loss of Tuesdays, though. Let me have it, Will.
Okay.
You see this? Will is, interrupting me already. Where's my mute button?
Nice. Hey, you're the one who asked us to unmute. That's on you, boy.
That's true. I know. I asked for it, didn't I? Well, I do want to start by just expressing my heartfelt gratitude to these incredible elders whom you just heard tell their incredible stories, or a glimpse into their incredible life stories. You know, co-facilitating this workshop series has been truly transformative for me. And, I really do feel like a different person in a lot of ways. I feel expanded and connected across time and to people across in this virtual space. It's amazing, but I really feel like I've bonded so deeply with each of you. So thank you so much for this. And I'm so glad we get to share this with the audience we have here today. So why don't we, and I will say continue to say thank you. This is just the first time. I'm just like, I'm really grieving that this is coming to a close, but I'm looking forward to the next chapter in our storytelling community and to welcoming new people into it as well. So for this segment, we're going to talk a little bit about some of these issues that have come up. If you have any questions, I'm speaking to the audience now. I want to welcome you to ask those using the Q&A feature built into Zoom. I'm going to try my best to keep my eye on that, to be part of this discussion, and then also to ask some questions that I have prepared for the storytellers myself. So please go ahead and use that Q&A function or whatever function is available to you to ask your questions. So as I said, in this segment, we're going to be reflecting together on the stories we've just heard, storytelling process, as well as the concept of storytelling for change. For my first question, I would like to know, what was it like to come together as a group of LGBT elders to reminisce, write, and tell your stories? Is there anything that you'd like to share about your experience with this storytelling process?
Well, I personally had no idea what to expect. I'm usually pretty much an independent sort of person. So I wasn't sure what to expect. I was definitely excited about somebody actually kind of sort of forcing me to actually do something I've been wanting to do, but haven't been able to self-motivate. So having you and Archie standing there in the background going, where is it? Kind of helped move the process along a little bit. But I was pleasantly surprised. Again, I wasn't sure what to expect. I had no idea. So I'm pleased the way that it turned out.
Well, thank you for taking a risk on us, with us.
Sure.
I'm glad you're here, Will.
You guys are the ones taking the risk with me. You have no idea.
Yeah,
You have no.
there's
Kim
truth.
knew this. Kim knew this. So if anything would have gone wrong, you'd have been able to blame her. Yo, it's all Kim. Yeah.
Well, it all went right. Nothing went wrong, Will.
Good.
I can weigh in a bit here on this question. First of all, like you said, Will, I didn't know what to expect either exactly. The first thing that I noticed, especially as we began to construct our stories, and I was listening to you other storytellers, is that I felt this really strong sense of connection. That we do have our differences, of course. We're human. We come from different places. We have different experiences. But I really came to feel connected to all of you as a senior and as a LGBTQ person. So that's one thing I wanted to say. The other thing is constructing a story for me was really hard. All of us can talk, but to construct a story that's coherent and that speaks to something in structure, the beginning, middle, and the end, and then all the little nuances, that was brand new to me. I'm glad for it, but it was hard. It was really difficult to keep it clean, keep it clear. But wow, I'm kind of surprised. I mean, I'm impressed with myself. I actually did it, I think. Seems to me. So those are my two ideas.
Yeah, listening to you, Danny, it makes me think of the reality that you hit the nail on the head. I mean, what I ended up doing in this workshop is the story that I shared with all of you is a very personal story. And normally I don't let people get to that part of me. And had I not been called out, I mean, when I was first thinking about, well, actually threw out my first idea, it wasn't shot down. It was just suggested that really, I think that there might be something else that would be a little bit more. So it reminded me of not so much trusting you guys, but actually telling myself. And I will tell you, this happened to me once before doing advocacy, and it was about what I talked about yesterday. And I think I might have mentioned it. When I first started working and getting the Affordable Care Act passed, I would tell people that I was living with a pre-existing condition. And I did that for, I don't know, a couple of years at the very beginning. And then right as we were getting close to when they were actually going to vote on this legislation, and I was trying to convince people that this was something really important, and I thought, the term pre-existing conditions doesn't describe jack shit. I need them to understand why this is important to me. And I stood on a stage in front of 1,500 people and said, I'm a person living with HIV and an AIDS diagnosis. It was so liberating and so freeing, and the same sense talking about my voice, which is, I know it's my own perception, and I appreciate when all of you tell me how lovely I sound. But in my head and in the darkest part where all of us live and we're very afraid, that part of me is still very sensitive about that particular topic. So to be able to open up and to share that story with you took a conscious choice. And again, you reminded me of that, Danny. So the similarities were there. I had to make that conscious choice that I could tell that other story and I could have BS'd my way through it and you guys would have never known the difference. But you gave me the gift of having me go to the place of truth, which the community supported it. So it works out all the way around. Sorry, I'll get off my soapbox now.
Stay on.
And I think what you're saying, Will, is that it's not just difficult to write a story, as Danny's saying. It's also difficult to put yourself in that vulnerable place of reflecting on difficult, challenging, emotional topics that are connected to negative emotions. So, and I think so storytelling is hard work, really hard work, and it can be painful work, but it can also be healing work, especially when you have a community of support like we've been able to create. It's, you know, and that was, we hardly did anything to make that happen. You know, that manifested because of the people in the group as well. Okay, so would anyone else like to share about the experience of going through this process?
I'd like to share just one thing quickly, if I could, Nick, please.
Yeah.
For me, at this stage of life where I've dedicated myself to the issues of aging in general and LGBT aging in particular, this was really an affirming experience. I know, or I knew before we started, everyone who's on the panel with me in person, except for Will, whom I'd known virtually for a long, long time from social media. And it was a real luxury to be able to spend this time with these people while we were achieving a level of intimacy, which is very important in this stage of life as we are faced, as are all aging people, with the issues of social isolation. So to make these connections and to strengthen them to the depth of intimacy rather than casual relationships was very, very important. So my friends that I knew here, I now know even better. And we have shared with each other, we have trusted each other, we've gone to the very, depths of our souls and sharing and coming up with the stories. So the stories themselves are only secondary for me to the experience of relating to the folks on this panel.
Thank you, Don. Phyllis or Tim, would you like to chime in here? I want to make sure I give you the opportunity just to react to the experience before moving on to the next question. Or not. That's
Move
cool.
on.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing the space. Okay, so the next question I want to ask concerns how this workshop series and this showcase is marketed, stories from the first out generation. And for those of us who are unfamiliar with this idea, I was hoping that maybe some of the storytellers could speak about what it means to be part of the first out generation.
I have an interesting experience. My grandnephew is growing up, well, he's grown, he's in college, in the same small town that I did. And there is a huge difference that I can see. While I wasn't out when I lived in my small hometown, I certainly knew I was gay. But in the 60s and the 50s, I even knew back then, it was something that you didn't talk about at all. You were expected, as I got married, you were expected to marry, have kids, and live, that perfect American life of husband, wife, and kids. But my grandnephew, doesn't have that. He came out in high school, there was support. It took, his grandparents weren't happy, but they supported him in what he did, as well as his family and friends. And to me, it's kind of a microcosm to, he understands what I went through because we've talked about it. We've talked about having to hide being gay during a lot of the period, for afraid of being shunned, afraid of losing your job. So I think going through that as the first out generation is really important for the younger kids to understand what happened and to hopefully work to not lose that what we had gained. Because every day when you look at the political scene, that is threatened almost every day.
Phyllis, it sounds like you wanted to add something to that.
Yeah, exactly. You know, as you all know, I came out in midlife, and my partner knew early on in her life, in her teens. And what really fascinated me is an expression of how painful it was. And that was expressed in our lives by our wedding guest list. So I had a whole table of people from my school there, all of whom we agreed that it would have to be people we both liked, and that we both met. But there were lots of coworkers of hers that I'd met, but none of them, not a single one, was invited. And when I asked her about that, she was like, no, that's work. So she completely separated her social life from her work life because she's always done that. And so I think Tim's grandnephew and people like me that came out in the 90s have been spared. A lot of pain, even though there's still that insecurity.
Yeah. Thank you, Phyllis. Will.
Well, what I was thinking was not necessarily so much on the social issues that Tim was referencing, but it makes me think about how the LGBT being out, since the community was out, I'm thinking of the HIV AIDS epidemic and its initial beginning, and how it was the LGBTQ community that fought for healthcare parity, that pushed the CDC to do the kinds of testing, that pushed big pharma to create the kinds of drugs that needed to be done. I mean, all of the benefits that people now enjoy as part of our healthcare system, which still pretty much sucks and needs to be rebuilt from top to bottom. But even the things that we now have were the result of the efforts that we took at the beginning of that crisis to make healthcare better for everyone, you know, because we were a shunned community. So having that political will, which we had gotten only 10 years earlier. I mean, Stonewall was in 69, HIV was in the early 80s. That's freaking 11 years. But we had enough political muscle at that point to be able to take to the streets, to do die-ins, to force. I mean, yeah, we should have been doing some of the shit that we did back then over the course of the last 3 years. Why the world hasn't is beyond me, but you know, I long for those days. And if we have to, I know that I can do that again. But again, I think that there's that other example. Tim was talking about how now the generation coming up, you can come out in high school and you're getting supported. Whoa, that is so cool. You know, we have access to medications. I was watching how we're dealing with COVID-19 and coming up with a vaccine. None of this would have been happening the way that it's happening had HIV not happened, had we not pushed for those kinds of testing schedules and creation. So yeah, I think that there are benefits. There's been a cost to getting those benefits, but there are benefits.
Yeah.
So.
And looking at this from the perspective of a member of a younger generation, you know, we have to thank you for visibility. And we forget that, I think. We take for granted these benefits that we have inherited from your hardship. And so it's interesting to think about that disconnection in our experiences of the world, but also in terms of visibility. I have incredible models of what LGBT aging looks like in you, but you didn't have that. And right. Yeah, I'm thankful to have the perspective shift to reflect on that. Don, I want, oh yeah, Tim, go ahead. And then I want Don to.
Okay, I'm sorry. I just wanted to comment a bit on the HIV and what the other thing it did to us. I'm a long-term survivor of HIV, but it put us back in the closet. In a lot of ways, that we couldn't necessarily expose ourselves as being gay because there weren't laws to protect us at the time. And there were no HIV laws to protect us. And especially in the early phases of HIV, not only could you not get treatment, you really couldn't tell anybody and be honest about who you were for fear of getting fired. And it was going back into the closet as far as I was concerned.
Right. Don, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I did. I see this issue of being the first out generation of LGBT elders as being political and being very significant. And this is my perspective. First of all, unless one is a white gay male of Christian WASP experience and privilege, then the whole issue of being part of the LGBT community is intersectional. And we vary in our experiences, in our perceptions. Now, the first thing that I became aware of that I was politically was I became aware of the fact that I was Black. And I mentioned that I'm a native Chicagoan. And when I was 5 years old, Emmett Till's body was brought back to the city. And even at 5, I was very aware of it because I was aware of how our community was stressed. It's the first time that I saw adults cry in public because of something that was going on. And I learned that a kid who was just a little older than me had been killed because of his color. And that began my life of political involvement. And it went on and on from there. The thing that is significant to me about this generation of LGBT people is that we have lived the entire arc of the LGBT civil rights movement. When we were born, homosexuality was against the law in every state of the Union. And it wasn't until it was decriminalized in the state of Illinois in 1960 that decriminalization started. We were listed in the DSM as having mental disorder because of our sexual orientation. We were turned away from the face of God in every major religious community. You know, we were social pariah, but we fought our way. And just for timing purposes, of course, there were other preceding events, but we time our civil rights movement from the time of Stonewall. And with that became national movements like the Gay Liberation Front. And we became public, and we started to establish communities, and we moved into the public forefront, making demands for our freedom. And we've gone from that point up to the point that we've come now. When I start marching in pride parades, literally my entire personal and professional and physical life were at risk. These are experiences that occur today in some parts of the country for individuals, but it's not a collective community experience like it was. And when I was young, we had no idea of what this stage would be like because there was nobody out to show us what it would be like. And then when we went through the HIV/AIDS epidemic, and we lost so many of our contemporaries, of course we had no idea that we even survived to be this old. So now we are here. And the reason why I'm committed to the causes of our community is because it's time that we are given consideration. I live in a residence here in Chicago that is the 4th development in the nation that's designed to be designed to be LGBT senior friendly. You know, it serves roughly 60 LGBT people, but we have tens of thousands of LGBT people who have problems finding housing, finding services, having their place recognized in society. So yes, we are out and we're starting a movement. And for those of you who are younger, you're going to inherit some of this. Some of our victories, some of the things that we've accomplished, but you will also inherit an agenda for where you will need to continue in your time. So
thank you, Don. Thank you. No, and we will do it together. We'll be, hand in hand. This
Absolutely.
is we're doing it together. So that's what this is about as well, and the intergenerational work that we're doing. I want to move on to a new topic, but I first want to touch upon, the fact that you brought to light that you live in an LGBT affirming community. And I also want to connect that to what Tim was saying about going back into the closet. One of the issues that that LGBT elders confront is that when they move into elder care facilities, residential facilities, assisted living, long-term care facilities, because of fear and uncertainty surrounding their safety, they go back into the closet. So they may have lived visibly for a while and then at a late age become invisible. So it's complex. On the one hand, we have greater visibility for our LGBT elders, but at the same time, there's this serious problem where some elders fear needing to hide their identity. So just wanted to identify that and name that as one serious issue that we should all be thinking about quite a bit more. I want to, and a comment came up also about the parallels between HIV/AIDS and COVID, and also their disproportionate impact on African Americans and BIPOC communities. So just wanted to identify that came up as a comment, and that's a specific problem for people who have lived through the HIV/AIDS epidemic and are now experiencing COVID, another pandemic. But the question I want to pivot to now is about change. And we received another question about, specifically for Danny, actually, about what it's like to live as an out trans elder. So, and Danny, I know you have something to say about this, about change and how we make change. So maybe we can tie those two questions together. I was hoping you could maybe we could think a little bit more concretely about what we need to do to change to make the situation better for elders. And of course, you'll speak maybe about your own experience from the perspective of a trans woman.
Sure. I would say this, that first of all, the scope of what needs to be changed is, when we think about it, when I think about it sometimes, it's so overwhelming because we're a very small percentage, LGBTQ people are, of the world and of this country and of the city. And we meet exclusion, just as a matter of course. So sometimes it's hard to think about what exactly needs to be changed and cover everything. I'm just going to say one thing. Okay. In my story, I focused exclusively on just one experience in one place. And I did that. First of all, it becomes an easier story to tell, for me anyway. But it brings me and it brings us to a place that most people usually get to, and that's a hospital. And the hospitals are large. A lot of departments, a lot of different doctors. Yet it is a place that if the hospital decides to make changes, that it impacts broadly across a city. It really can. So a specific, simple change, it has to do with paperwork. Mm-hmm. Asking for new patients or existing patients what their gender identity is, and listing all of the different identities that people have. And then, so it starts there, and then asking for pronouns. Just ask. That's all you have to do, is just ask. When we, especially as trans folks, when we see that we're being asked our pronouns, we know that this is an attempt to affirm us and to make us feel more welcome. And so just on the issue of paperwork, and that's just the start of it, but it has to do with policy. Policies have to change. And I'm just talking about hospitals now. Policies have to change, conversations have to start, and they need to be spearheaded from the top. Coming from the bottom up is good, but the people that are in charge, that make the decisions, need to say, this is something we're going to do, and here's how we're going to do it. And they have to have the will to do it. And from there, it can grow. So I just think of where I was. I happened to have my surgery at U of I Health Hospital. I mentioned that, Nick, because I know that you're connected there, and a lot of other people are. That's such a massive place. And just think of all the different people that interact outside in the community. If they see that U of I, and they are, by the way, I happen to know this for a fact, are making an effort to make substantive change to how they interact and support the LGBTQ community. That's impressive. And other people say, you know what, we need to do that too. So I started off with paperwork, and it's such a small thing, but it's really important, because what did I do? I mean, I had to do all that myself, which is fine. But it sure would be nice to walk in and have everybody speaking immediately.
Exactly.
And understanding. And if they don't know, ask us, no matter who we are.
Yeah, Phyllis is shaking her head. You know, it's amazing, Danny, that you have self-advocated, but it shouldn't be necessary. And there are small changes that can happen today, and it may be start as simple as paperwork. For those people who are more interested in change, you can look at the organization SAGE. They have they're on their website, the National Resource Center for LGBT Aging has a great resource document about how to make practical changes. So I'll leave that with you. We have to move toward wrapping up because we only have a couple minutes left, unfortunately. But I do want to just say, unfortunately, we didn't have time to go in depth into this direction, but you know, we've talked a lot about the issues and challenges associated with LGBT aging. But one of the things that has been expressed to us from the storytellers is that there's also a lot of joy, and you know, this is about painting an accurate reality of LGBT aging, and we've only really focused on part of it. I don't know. We have 1 minute. Phyllis, can you speak to this? I wanted to ask the question to the group about, you know, what brings you joy about being an LGBT elder?
My niece always laughs at me because I'm excited every year when my birthday comes, besides it being my own personal holiday, that every year it gets better. I mean, physically I can do a little less, but my sense of myself, my ability to be in charge of what's going on in this part of my world, just blossoms and continues. And so my associations, my ability to look backwards over time, my ability to be more and more me, it just grows. And so it's pretty incredible. And so I'm liking being older so far.
Yes. Thank you, Phyllis.
And I'm loving being lesbian. So that's a wonderful thing.
Thank you for ending us on that note. I'm going to flip it over to Kim to say goodbye.
Oh my goodness, this has been so wonderful. Thank you for ending us on that note, Phyllis. I really appreciate it. Appreciate all the storytellers. Thank you, Tim, Don, Danny, Phyllis, Will, and the other two members of our community who aren't on the panel today. Special thank you to our trainers, Archie and Nick. This has been just fantastic. We're going to have to find a way to do this again and keep this going. At the top of the program, I mentioned that we have another type of training coming up focused on Advocacy for LGBT older adults. And this is going to be a 4-part training, so multiple sessions like this one. I'm hoping that some of our storytellers, if not all of them, will come back, and then we have room for a few more. And that training will actually culminate with a breakfast on the LGBT aging issues with some members from the Illinois General Assembly and others. So I cannot say how much I really appreciate Storytelling for Change and being a fly on the wall. A lot of times I was there, but I wasn't visible. My picture was up, but I was listening. And I've just seen this community come together in such a powerful way, and hope that we can continue to maintain this. So this is a super busy day for Pride Action Tank and AIDS Foundation Chicago. So in about half an hour, we are going to have another program called AIDS Foundation Chicago Policy Fireside Chat. So it's a day of Zoom for us. So I'm going to let folks go and get settled, and I hope you'll join us for that. I think Jack put the link to the registration for the Fireside Chat in the chat. Also, you'll begin to see more and more information about the next series of training and the breakfast coming up in December. So thank you all again. I am so sad that this is ending, but this has been so powerful, and I hope it was for you too. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, Kim.